And how we all doing tonight? Okie doke. So, just getting some things wrapped up, and then we will be good to go. Hey, Skippy, how you doing, bud? Good to see you here. Thanks for showing up. Hey, Nicole, I figured you were too busy playing The Sims. So, but good to see you regardless. Cool. Because Discord actually tells me what you're playing. Yep. Yep, it's all good. Okay. And magic. Okay, let's just get going with this. Okay, so we'll change scenes here. And, I gotta hit record, or else that's gonna be a problem. There we go. Previously, in Chapter 6 of Tom Swift and his Airship, well, Tom and Mr. Sharp got back to the house and started making repairs to the airship and had invited Mr. Swift Sr. To go with them next time, and he said no in a rather odd way. So hopefully we'll see what happens here. Chapter 7. Andy Tries a Trick. Without loss of time, the young inventor and the aeronaut began to repair the damage done to the Red Cloud by colliding with the tower. The most important part to reconstruct was the propeller, and Mr. Sharp decided to make two instead of one in order to have an extra one in case of future accidents. Tom's task was to arrange the mechanism so that, hereafter, the rudder could not become jammed, and so prevent the airship from steering properly. This the lad accomplished by a simple but effective device which, when the balloonist saw it, caused him to compliment Tom. "That's worth patenting," he declared. "I advise you to take out papers on that." "It seems such a simple thing," answered the youth, "and I don't see much use of spending the money for a patent. Airships aren't likely to be so numerous that I could make anything off that patent." "You take my advice," insisted Mr. Sharp. "Airships are going to get used more in the future than you have any idea of. You get that device patented." Tom did so, and not many years afterwards he was glad that he did, as it brought him quite an income. It required several days' work on the Red Cloud before it was in shape for another trial. During the hours when he was engaged in the big shed helping Mr. Sharp, the young inventor spent many minutes calling to mind the memory of a certain fair face, and I think I need not mention any names to indicate whose face it was. "She promised to go for a ride with me," mused the lad. "I hope she doesn't back out. But I'll want to learn more about managing the ship before I venture with her in it. It won't do to have any accidents then. There's Ned Newton, too. I must take him for a skim in the clouds. Guess I'll invite him over some afternoon and give him a private view of the machine when we get it in shape again." About a week after the accident at the school, Mr. Sharp remarked to Tom one afternoon, "If the weather's good tomorrow, we'll try another flight. Do you suppose your father will come along?" "I don't know," answered the lad. "He seemed much engrossed in something. It's unusual, too, for he most generally tells me what he's engaged upon. However, I guess he'll say something about it when he gets ready." "Well, if he doesn't feel just like coming, don't argue with him. He might be nervous, and while the ship is new, I don't want any nervous passengers aboard. I can't give them my attention and look after the running of the machinery." "I was going to propose bringing a friend of mine over to see us make the trip tomorrow," went on the young inventor. "Ned Newton, you know him. He'd like a ride." Oh, I guess Ned's all right. Let him come along. We won't go very high tomorrow. After a trial rise by means of the gas, I'm going to lower the ship to the ground and try for an elevation by means of the planes. Oh, yeah, bring your friend along. Ned Newton was delighted the next day to receive Tom's invitation, and though a little dubious about trusting himself in an airship for the first time, finally consented to go with his chum. He got a half a holiday from the bank, and shortly after dinner went to Tom's house. "Come out in the shed and take a look at the Red Cloud," proposed the young inventor. "Mr. Sharp isn't quite ready to start yet, and I'll explain some things to you." The big shed was deserted when the lads entered, and went to the loft where they were on level with the big red aluminum tank. Tom began with a description of the machinery, and Ned followed him with interest. "Now we'll go down into the car or cabin," continued the young navigator of the air, "and I'll show you what we do when we're touring amid the clouds." As they started to descend the flight of steps from the loft platform, a noise on the ground below attracted their attention. "Guess that's Mr. Sharp coming," said Ned. Tom leaned over and looked down. An instant later, he grasped the arm of his chum and motioned to him to keep silent. "Take a look," whispered the young inventor. "Andy Foger!" exclaimed Ned, peering over the railing. "Yes, and Sam Snedeker and Pete Bailey are with him. They sneaked in when I left the door open. Wonder what they want." "Up to some mischief, I'll wager," commented Ned. "Hark, they're talking." "Hark? Okay." The two lads on the loft listened intently. Though the cronies on the ground below them did not speak loudly, their voices came plainly to the listeners. "Let's poke a hole in their gas bag," proposed Sam. "That'll make 'em think they're not so smart as they pretend." "Nah, we can't do that," answered Andy. "Why not?" declared Pete. "Because the bag's way up on top part of the shed, and I'm not going to climb up there." "You're afraid," sneered Sam. "Am not. I'll punch your face if you say that again. Besides, the thing that holds gas is made of aluminum, and we can't make a hole in it unless we take an axe, and that makes too much noise." "We ought to play some sort of a trick on Tom Swift," proposed Pete. "He's too fresh." Tom shook his fist at the lads on the ground, but of course they did not see him. "I have it," came Andy. "What?" demanded his two cronies. "We'll cut some of the guy wires from the planes and rudders. That'll make the airship collapse. They'll think the wires broke from the strain. Take out your knives and saw away at the wires. Hurry, too, or they may catch us." "You're caught now," whispered Ned to Tom. "Come on down, let's give him a trouncing." Tom hesitated. He looked quickly about the loft, and then a smile replaced the frown of righteous anger on his face. "I have a better way," he said. "What is it?" "See that pile of dirt?" And he pointed to some refuse that had been swept up from the floor of the loft. Ned nodded. "It consists of a lot of shavings, sawdust, and what's more, a lot of soot and lampblack that we used in mixing some paint. We'll sweep the whole pile down on their heads and make 'em wish they stayed away from this place." "Good!" exclaimed Ned, chuckling. "Give me a broom. There's another one for you." The two lads in this loft peered down. The red-headed, squint-eyed bully and his chums had their knives out, and were about to cut some of the important guy wires when, at a signal from Tom, Ned, with a sweep of his broom, sent a big pile of the dirt, sawdust, and lampblack down upon the heads of the conspirators. The young inventor did the same thing, and for an instant the lower part of the shed looked as if a dirt storm had taken place there. The pile of refuse went straight down on the heads of the trio, and as they were looking up in order to cut the wires, they received a considerable amount of it in their faces. In an instant, the lads were covered in black soot and refuse. Then came a series of howls. "Whoa! Who did that? I'm blinded! The shed is falling down!" "Run, fellas, run!" screamed Andy. "There's been an explosion. We'll be killed." At that moment, the big doors of the shed were thrown open, and Mr. Sharp came in. He started back in astonishment at the sight of the three grotesque figures, their faces black with soot, and their clothes covered with sawdust and shavings, rushing wildly around. "That'll teach you to come meddling around here, Andy Foger," cried Tom. What? Oh, wait, spluttered the bully, almost speechless with rage. Sam and Pete were wildly trying to wipe the stuff from their faces, but only made matters worse. They were so startled that they did not know enough to run out of the open doors. "Wish we had some more of that stuff to put on 'em," remarked Ned, who was holding his sides that ached from laughter. "I have it," cried Tom, and he caught up a bucket of red paint that had been used to give the airship its brilliant hue. Running to the end of the loft, Tom stood for an instant over the trio of lads who were threatening and imploring by turns. "Here's another souvenir of your visit," shouted the young inventor, as he dashed the bucket of red paint down on the conspirators. This completed the work of the dirt and the soot, and a few seconds later, each face was covered with red paint. The trio dashed out. They shed shavings, sawdust, and lampblack at every step, and from their clothes and hands and faces dripped the carmine paint. "Better have your pictures taken," cried Ned, peering from an upper window. "Yeah, send us one," added Tom, joining his chum. Andy looked up at them. He dug a mass of red paint from his left ear and removed a mass of soot from his right cheek, and shaking his fist, which was alternately striped red and black, cried out in a rage, "I'll get even with you yet, Tom Swift." "You only got what was coming to you," retorted the young inventor. "The next time you try sneaking around this airship, trying to damage it, you'll get worse, and I'll have you arrested. You've had your lesson, and don't forget it." The red-haired bully, doubly red-haired now, had nothing more to say. There was nothing he could say, and accompanied by his companions, he made a beeline for the rear gate in the fence and darted across the meadow. They were all sorry enough looking specimens, but solely through their own fault. End of chapter 7. Okay, so we will switch this back, and we're going to run another 60-second ad break like we've been doing. And here we go. And welcome back. Thank you for hanging out and watching that commercial. And we will... Was it a good commercial anyway? I have no idea. But we will continue. Okay, previously in Chapter 7 of Tom Swift and His Airship, Andy Foger and the boys, Sam and Pete, came around to the shed and were going to sabotage the airship. But Tom got them, and he and Ned gave them the what for. Chapter 8, Winning a Prize. "Well, Tom, what happened?" asked Mr. Sharp as he saw the trio running away. "Looks as if you had an exciting time here." "No, those fellas had all the excitement," declared Ned. "We had the fun. and the two lads proceeded to relate what had taken place. "Tried to damage the airship, eh?" asked Mr. Sharp. "I wish I'd caught 'em at it, the scoundrels, but perhaps you handled them as well as I could have done." "I guess so," assented Tom. "I must see if they did cut any of the wires." But the young inventor and his chum had acted too quickly, and it was found that nothing had been done to the Red Cloud. A little later, the airship was taken out of the shed and made ready for a trip. The gas ascension was first used, and Ned and Mr. Swift were passengers with Tom and Mr. Sharp. The machine went about 1,000 feet up in the air and then was sent in various directions to the no small delight of a large crowd that had gathered in the meadow back of the Swift property, for it only required the sight of an airship looming its bulk above the fence and buildings to attract a throng. It is safe to say this time, however, that Andy Foger and his cronies were not in the audience. They were probably too busy removing the soot and red paint. Although it was the first time Mr. Swift had ever been in an airship, he evinced no great astonishment. He evinced. That's a verb you don't hear much at all. Evinced. Wow. Okay. In fact, he seemed to be thinking deeply, and on some subject not connected with aeronautics. Tom noticed the abstraction of his father and shook his head. Clearly, the aged inventor was not his usual self. As for Ned Newton, his delight knew no bounds. At first, he was a bit apprehensive as the big ship went higher and higher and swung about, but he soon lost his fear and enjoyed the experience as much as did Tom. The young inventor was busy helping Mr. Sharp manage the machinery, rudder planes, and motor. A flight of several miles was made, and Tom was wishing they might pay another visit to the Roxman Seminary, but Mr. Sharp, after completing several evolutions, designed to test the steering qualities of the craft, put back home. "We'll land in the meadow and try rising by the planes alone," he said. In this evolution, it was deemed best for Mr. Swift and Ned to alight, as there was no telling just how the craft would behave. Tom's father was very willing to get out, but Ned would have remained in only for the desire of his friend. With the two propellers whirring at a tremendous speed and all the gas out of the aluminum container, the Red Cloud shot forward, running over the level ground of the meadow, where a starting course had been laid out. "Clear the track!" cried Mr. Sharp as he saw the crowd closing up in front of him. The men, boys, several girls, and women made a living lane, though this shot the craft, and then when through this shot the craft, and then when sufficient momentum had been obtained, Tom, at a command from the aeronaut, pulled the lever of the elevation rudder. Up into the air shot the nose of the Red Cloud as the wind struck the slanting surface of the planes, and a moment later it was sailing high above the heads of the throng. "That's the stuff," cried Mr. Sharp. "It works as well as the way it does with the gas." Higher and higher it went, and then coming to a level keel, the craft was sent here and there, darting about like a bird, and going about in huge circles. "Start the gas machine, and we'll come to rest in the air," said the balloonist, and Tom did so. As the powerful vapor filled the container, the ship acquired a buoyancy, and there was no need of going at high speed in order to sustain it. The propellers were stopped, and the Red Cloud floated 2,000 feet in the air, only a little distance below some fleecy white masses from which she took her name. The demonstration was a great success. The gas was again allowed to escape, the propeller set in motion, and purely as an aeroplane, the ship was again sent forward. By means of the planes and rudders, a perfect landing was made in the meadow, a short distance from where the start had been made. The crowd cheered the plucky youth and Mr. Sharp. "Now I'm ready to go on a long trip any time you are, Tom," said the aeronaut that night. "We'll fit up the car and get ready," agreed the youth. "How about you, Dad?" "Me? You see, I'll think about it." And Mr. Swift went to his own room, carrying with him a package of papers containing intricate calculations. Tom shook his head, but said nothing. He could not understand his father's conduct. Work was started the next day on fitting up the car or cabin of the airship so that several persons could live, eat, and sleep in it for 2 weeks if necessary. The third day after this task had been commenced, the mail brought an unusual communication to Tom and Mr. Sharp. It was from an aero club of Blakeville, a city distant about 100 miles, and stated that a competition for airplanes and dirigible balloons was to be held in the course of 2 weeks. The affair was also designed to further interest in the sport and to demonstrate what progress had been made in the art of conquering the air. Prizes were to be given, and the inventors of the Red Cloud, the achievements of which the Committee of Arrangements had heard, were invited to compete. "Shall we go in for it, Tom?" asked the balloonist. "I'm willing if you are." "Then let's do it. Let's see how our craft shows up alongside others. I know something of this club. It's all right, but the Carnival is likely to be a small one. Once I gave a balloon exhibition for them. The managers are all right. Well, we'll have a try at it. Won't do us any harm to win a prize. Then, for a long trip." As it was not necessary to have a car or cabin completely fitted up in order to compete for the prize, work in that direction was suspended for the time being, and more attention was paid to the engine, the planes, and the rudders. Some changes were made, and a week later the Red Cloud departed for Blakeville. As the rules of the contest required 3 passengers, Ned Newton was taken along, Mr. Swift having arranged with the bank president so that the lad could have a few days off. The Red Cloud arrived at the Carnival grounds in the evening, having been delayed on the trip by a broken cogwheel, which was mended in midair. As the 3 navigators approached, they saw a small machine flying around the grounds. "Look!" cried Ned excitedly. "What a small airship!" "That's a That's wrong voice, dummy." "That's a monoplane," declared Tom, who was getting to be quite an expert. "Yes, same kind that was used to cross the English Channel," interjected Mr. Sharp. "They're too uncertain for my purposes, though. They are all right under certain circumstances." Hardly had he spoken than a puff of wind caused the daring manipulator of the monoplane to swerve to one side. He had to make a quick descent, so rapid was it, in fact, that the tips of one of his planes was smashed. "It'll take him a day to repair that," commented the aeronaut dryly. The Red Cloud created a sensation as she slowly settled down in front of the big tent assigned to her. Tom's craft was easily the best one at the Carnival so far, though the manager said other machines were on the way. The exhibition opened the next day, but no flights were to be attempted until the day following. 2 more crafts arrived, a large triplane and a dirigible balloon. There were many visitors to the ground, and Tom, Ned, and Mr. Sharp were kept busy answering questions put by those who crowded into their tent. Toward the close of the day, a fussy little Frenchman entered, and, making his way to where Tom stood, asked, "Are you the owner of this machine?" "One of them," replied the lad. "Ha! Sacre! Then I challenge you to a race. I have a monoplane that is the swiftest ever. 1,000 francs will I wager you that I can fly higher and farther than you." And I swear to God, that's how it's printed out. All the Z's are there. It's in the dialogue. "Shall we take him up, Mr. Sharp?" asked Tom. "We'll race with him after we get through with the club entries," decided the aeronaut. "But not for money. It's against my principles, and I don't believe your father would like it. Racing for prizes is a different thing." "Well, we will devote the money to charity," conceded the Frenchman. This was a different matter, and one to which Mr. Sharp did not object, so it was arranged that a trial should take place after the regular affairs. That night was spent in getting the Red Cloud in shape for the contests of the next day. She was groomed until every wire was taut, and every cog, lever, and valve working perfectly. Ned Newton helped all he could. So much has appeared in the newspapers of the races at Blakeville that I will not devote much space here to them. Suffice it to say that the Red Cloud easily distanced the big dirigible from which much was expected. It was a closer contest with the large triplane, but Tom's airship won, and was given the prize, a fine silver cup. As the Carnival was a small one, no other craft in class with the Red Cloud had been entered, so Tom and Mr. Sharp had to be content with the one race they won. There were other contests among monoplanes and biplanes, and the little Frenchman won 2 races. "Now for the affair with the monster balloon of the rouge color," he cried, and as he alighted from his monoplane while an assistant filled the gasoline tank. "I will in circles go around you, up and down, this side, the other, and presto! I am back at the starting place before you have begun. Then charity shall be the richer." I'm sorry, that just is ridiculous. Okay. "All right, wait and see," said Tom easily. But though he showed much confidence, he asked Mr. Sharp in private just before the impromptu contest, "Do you think we can beat him?" "Well," said the aeronaut, shrugging his shoulders, "you can't tell much about the air. His machine certainly goes very fast, but too much wind will be the undoing of him, while it will only help us, and I think," he added, "that we're going to get a breeze." It was arranged that the Red Cloud would start from the ground without the use of the gas so as to make the machines more even. At the signal, off they started, the motors making a great racket. The monoplane with the little Frenchman in the seat got up first. "Aha!" he cried gaily. "I leave you in the rear. Catch me if you can." "Don't let him beat us," implored Ned. "Can't you speed her up any more?" inquired Tom of Mr. Sharp. The aeronaut nodded grimly and turned more gasoline into the 20-cylindered engine. Like a flash, the Red Cloud darted forward, but the Frenchman also increased his speed and did actually at first circle around the bigger machine, for his affair was much lighter. But when he tried to repeat that feat, he found that he was being left behind. "That's the stuff! We're winning!" yelled Tom, Ned joining in the shout. Then came a puff of wind. The monoplane had to descend, for it was in danger of turning turtle. Still, the navigator was not going to give up. He flew along at a lower level. Then Mr. Sharp opened up the Red Cloud's engine at full speed, and it was the big machine which now sailed around the other. I protest! I protest!" cried the Frenchman above the explosions of his motor. "The wind is too strong for me." Mr. Sharp said nothing, but with a queer smile on his face, he sent the airship down toward the earth. A moment later, he was directly under the monoplane. Then, quickly rising, he fairly caught the Frenchman's machine on top of a square platform of the gas container, the bicycle wheels of the monoplane resting on the flat surface. And so swiftly did the Red Cloud fly along that it carried the monoplane with it, to the chagrin of the French navigator. "A trick! A trick!" he cried. "It is not fair!" Then, dropping down, Mr. Sharp allowed the monoplane to proceed under its own power, while he raced on to the finish mark, winning, of course, by a large margin. "Ha! A trick! I race you tomorrow, and again tomorrow!" cried the beaten Frenchman as he alighted. "No thanks," answered Tom. "We've had enough. I guess charity will be satisfied." The little Frenchman was a good loser, and paid over the money, which was given to the Blakeville Hospital, the institution receiving it gladly. At the request of the Carnival Committee, Mr. Sharp and Tom gave an exhibition of high and long flights the next day, and created no little astonishment by their daring feats. "Well, I think we have reason to be proud of our ship," remarked Mr. Sharp that night. "We won the first contest we were ever in, and beat that speedy monoplane, which was no small thing to do, as they are very fast." "But wait until we go on our trip," added Tom, as he looked at the cup they won. He little realized what danger they were to meet within the flight that was before them. End of Chapter 8. Okay, we'll flip this back over. Wow. That French accent thing is just so weird. Okay, I'm gonna actually mute my mic, and we will go. go to commercial. Ah. Skippy, yeah, the poor Frenchman got dunked on. Yep, I tried to get back before the commercial was done, but 60 seconds goes by fast. All right. So, the other thing is, man, I had to change some language in there because, whew, they were very racist back in the day. And it wasn't the Frenchman that was the problem. It was pretty bad. All right. Take a little sip, and then we'll get on with it. Previously on Chapter 8 of Tom Swift and His Airship. Well, Tom and Mr. Sharp got an invite to Blakeville to enter some races. And they won pretty handily and met an eccentric Frenchman. Chapter 9. The Runaway Auto. Had the inventors of the Red Cloud desired, they could have made considerable money by giving further exhibitions at the Blakeville Aero Carnival and at others which were to be held in the near future at adjoining cities. The fame of the new machine had spread, and there were many invitations to compete for prizes. But Tom and Mr. Sharp wished to try their skill in a long flight, and at the close of the Blakeville exhibition, they started for Shopton, arriving there without mishap, though Tom more than half hoped that they might happen to strike the tower of a certain school. I needn't specify where. The first thing to be done was to complete the fitting up of the car or cabin. I've noticed that, just as another aside, that for whatever reason, when they say car, they have to say or cabin. Like they've said it like 4 or 5 times already when they're talking about the cabin of the Red Cloud. So it's just a little strange. I'm not sure why they need to clarify all the time. No berths had as yet been put in, and these were first installed after the Red Cloud was in her shed. Then an electrical heating and cooking apparatus was fitted in, some additional machinery, tanks for carrying water, and chemicals for making the gas, boxes of provisions, various measuring instruments, and other supplies were put in the proper places until the cabin was filled almost to its capacity. Of course, particular attention had been paid to the ship proper, and every portion was gone over until Mr. Sharp was sure it was in shape for a long flight. "Now the question is," he said to Tom one evening, "who shall we take with us? You and I'll go, of course, but I'd like one more. I wonder if your father can't be induced to accompany us. He seemed to like the trial trip." "I'll ask tomorrow," said the lad. "He's very busy tonight. If he doesn't care about it, maybe Garrett Jackson will go." "I'm afraid not. He's too timid." I'd like to take Ned Newton, but he can't get any more time away from the bank. I guess we'll have to depend on Dad." But, to the surprise of Tom and Mr. Sharp, the aged inventor shook his head when the subject was broached to him the next day. "Why won't you go, Dad?" asked his son. "I'll tell you," replied Mr. Swift. "I was keeping it a secret until I'd made some advance in what I'm engaged upon, but I don't want to go because I'm on the verge of perfecting a new apparatus for submarine boats. It will revolutionize It will revolutionize travel under the water. And I've made didn't turn my page, and I don't want to leave home until I finish it. There is another point to be considered. The government has offered a prize for an underwater boat of a new type, and I wish to try for it." "So that's what you've been working on, eh, Dad?" asked his son. "That's it, and much as I'd like to accompany you, I don't feel free to go. My mind would be distracted, and I need to concentrate myself with this invention. It'll produce the most wonderful results, I'm sure. Besides, the government prize is no small one. It's $50,000 for a successful boat." Mr. Swift told something more about his submarine, but as I expect to treat of that in another book, I will not dwell on it here, as I know you're anxious to learn what happened on the trip of the Red Cloud. So this is the first time they foreshadowed a little earlier. My guess is that the fourth book is called Tom Swift and His Submarine or something like that. "Well," remarked Mr. Sharp somewhat dubiously, "I wonder who we can get to go. We need someone besides you and I, Tom." "I suppose I could get Eradicate Sampson and his mule Boomerang," replied the lad with a smile. "Yet I don't know." At that instant there was a tremendous racket outside. The loud puffing of an automobile could be heard, but mingled with it was the crash of wood, and then the whole house seemed jarred and shaken. "Is it an earthquake?" exclaimed Mr. Swift, springing to his feet and rushing to the library windows. "Something's happened," cried Tom. "Maybe an explosion of the airship gas," yelled Mr. Sharp, ready to run to the balloon shed, but there was no need. The crashing of wood ceased, and above the puffing of an auto could be heard a voice exclaiming, "Bless my very existence! Bless my cats and dogs! Good gracious, but I never meant to do this!" Tom, his father, and Mr. Sharp rushed to the long, low windows that opened on the veranda. There on the porch, which it had mounted by way of the steps, tearing away part of the railing, was a large touring car, and sitting at the steering wheel in a dazed sort of manner was Mr. Wakefield Damon. "Bless my shirt studs," he went on feebly, "but I've done it now." "What's the matter?" cried Tom, hastening up to him. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "Hurt? Not a bit of it. Bless my moonstone, it's the most lucky escape I ever had. But I've damaged your porch, and I haven't done my machine any good. Do you see anything of another machine chasing me?" Tom looked puzzled, but glanced up and down the road. Far down the highway could be discerned a cloud of dust, and from the midst of it came a faint chug-chug. "Looks like an auto down there," he said. "Thank goodness, bless my trousers, but I've escaped 'em," cried the eccentric man from whom Tom had purchased his motorcycle. "Escaped who?" asked Mr. Swift. "Those men, they were after me, but I may as well get out and explain. Dear me, how'll I ever get my car off your porch?" And Mr. Damon seemed quite distressed. "Never mind," answered Tom. "We can manage that. Tell us what happened." "Exactly," replied Mr. Damon, growing calmer. "Bless my shoe buttons, but I had a fright. 2 of 'em, in fact. You see," he went on, "I was out partly on pleasure and partly on business, the pleasure consisting in riding in my auto, which my physician recommended for my health. The business consisted in bringing to the Shopton Bank a large amount of cash. Well, I deposited it all right, but as I came out I saw some men hanging around. I didn't like their looks, and I saw them eyeing me rather sharply. I thought I'd seen them before, and sure enough I had. 2 of the men belonged to that Happy Harry gang." Tom made a quick motion of caution, pointing to his father, but it was not necessary, as Mr. Swift was absent-mindedly calculating on a piece of paper he had taken from his pocket, and had not heard what Mr. Damon said. The latter, however, knew what Tom meant, and went on. "Well, I didn't like the looks of these men, and when I saw them sizing me up, thinking I had drawn money out instead of putting it in, I decided to give them the slip. I got in my auto, but I was startled to see them get in their car. I headed for here, as I was coming to pay you a visit anyhow, and the mysterious men kept after me. It became a regular race. I put on all the speed I could and headed for your house, Tom, for I thought you would help me. I went faster and faster, and so did they. They were almost up to me, and I was just thinking of slowing down to turn in here when I lost control of my machine, and, well, I did turn in here, but not exactly as I intended. Bless my gaiters, I came in with rather more of a rush than I expected. It was awful, positively awful, I assure you. You've no idea how nervous I was, but I escaped those scoundrels, for they were rushed on when they saw what I'd done, smash the porch railing." "Probably they thought you'd smash them," observed Tom with a laugh, "but why did they follow you?" "Can't imagine, haven't the least idea. Bless my spark plug, but they might have imagined I had money. Anyhow, I'm glad I escaped them." "It's lucky you weren't hurt," said Mr. Sharp. "Oh, me, bless my existence, I'm always having narrow escapes." Mr. Damon caught sight of the red cloud, which was out in front of the big shed. "Bless my heart, what's that?" he added. "Our new airship," answered Tom proudly. "We're just planning a long trip in it, but we can't find a third member of the party to go along." "A third member?" exclaimed Mr. Damon. "Do you really mean it?" "We do. Bless my shoelaces, will you take me along?" "Do you mean that?" asked Tom, in turn, foreseeing a way out of their difficulties. "I certainly do," answered the eccentric man. "I am much interested in airships, and I might as well die up in the clouds as any other way. Certainly I prefer to being smashed up in an auto. Will you take me?" "Of course," cried Tom heartily, and Mr. Sharp nodded an assent. Then Tom drew Mr. Damon to one side. "We'll arrange a trip in a few minutes," the lad said. "Tell me more about those mysterious men, please." End of Chapter 9. That was a shorter chapter. Okay, so we're going to put a little bookmark here. And we're going to flip this back over here. And I'm going to look at the chat room and see, Charles, what are you doing? Oh, man. Hey, how you doing? So, yeah, we're just wrapping up Chapter 9 of Tom Swift and his airship. And this dude, Mr. Damon, says, "Bless my whatever," all the time. Like 100 different ways. So so thank you guys for hanging out tonight. For a couple of you, we'll see you in a little while in the FTH Beyond podcast. But as always, you can, if you're seeing this on demand, or if you're joining us in other ways, you can always follow me on Twitter at VO by Kurt. And yeah, we will see you next time. Thanks for joining us in the chat room. Have a good evening.